Welcome to this explainer. For centuries, we'd look up at the evening star and imagine a sister world, a humid, swampy paradise just hiding right beneath those brilliant clouds. But the moment our space probes finally pierced that veil, well, that romantic illusion was completely shattered. Instead, we found a crushing, toxic reality. Yet the true history of Venus is actually far more bizarre and far more fascinating than just a simple tale of a dead planet.
So let's dive right in. We have to ask ourselves a pretty wild question. What if the absolute deadliest planet in our solar system is actually hiding a living secret? Now, I know it's incredibly difficult to imagine life existing in a literal toxic hellscape, but we have to remember that planetary bodies, they aren't static. They have deep, incredibly dynamic histories. And the modern anomalies that are haunting the Venusian clouds today, they suggest a lingering mystery that really forces us to look backward in time, just to figure out what might actually be happening right above the surface.
To really appreciate that mystery, we first have to grasp just how hostile modern Venus actually is. 475 degrees Celsius, that's 887 degrees Fahrenheit. We are talking hot enough to melt lead. Add to that a crushing atmospheric pressure of 92 atmospheres, which is basically the equivalent of being nearly a kilometer underwater here on Earth, and top it all off with clouds of corrosive sulfuric acid. Today, it is a sterile, bone-dry desert of fractured basalt. But it absolutely wasn't always this way. Part 1. The Twins' Boiling Point. A runaway climate disaster. Flashback a few billion years, and Venus truly was Earth's twin. We're talking vast, shallow oceans of liquid water. Its early climate was regulated by a young sun that was about 30% dimmer than it is today, offering this perfect primordial soup that could have easily brewed primitive, water-based life. But as the sun aged and grew brighter, those oceans started to warm. This sent water vapor, which is a really potent greenhouse gas, up into the atmosphere, trapping heat, which then just evaporated even more water. Eventually, the oceans didn't just evaporate, they completely boiled away. Ultraviolet radiation split that water vapor. The heavy oxygen reacted with the crust, and the lightweight hydrogen just escaped into space forever. And without liquid water to lubricate the crust, plate tectonics just completely halted. Volcanoes kept belching out carbon dioxide, but with no oceans left to dissolve it, the CO2 simply built up into these massive, crushing layers until the entire atmosphere hit a supercritical phase. Section 2. Life in supercritical oceans. The magical phase boundary. Right in the middle of this apocalyptic transition, instead of total extinction, a thermodynamic anomaly occurred. See, when carbon dioxide is subjected to extreme pressure, greater than 72.9 atmospheres, and temperatures above 31.1 degrees Celsius, it does something weird. It stops being a normal gas, and it stops being a liquid. It actually becomes a supercritical fluid, or SCO2. The lower kilometers of the Venusian atmosphere seamlessly blurred into this bizarre fluid. It possessed the density of a liquid, but the viscosity of a gas. And because of a really cool phenomenon called critical opalescence, this incredibly dense ocean scattered light. It glowed in this hazy, refractive, golden amber twilight that completely blanketed the globe. Now, to understand how anything could survive this, we've got to throw out our Earth-centric bias toward water. On Earth, water is a polar solvent, so our cell membranes are phospholipid bilayers with the water-loving heads pointing out. But supercritical CO2? It's a nonpolar solvent. Think of it acting exactly like an industrial dry cleaning fluid. Which means, yeah, Venusian microbes essentially had to survive being permanently dry cleaned. To do that, they underwent a complete structural inversion, forming what we call reverse micelles. Basically, their membranes evolved inside out. The heads pointed inward to protect a microscopic little drop of essential water, while the tails pointed outward to interact smoothly with the supercritical CO2. But over millions of years, even that tiny internal drop of water just faded away, leading to some truly mind-bending biochemistry. Standard DNA absolutely needs water, so Cytherian life engineered entirely new genetic codes based on polyethers and long carbon-silicon chains called siloxanes. Their proteins actually folded in reverse, hiding their reactive polar centers safely inside. And since they had no sunlight or free oxygen to work with, they relied entirely on chemosynthesis driven by the planet's rampant volcanism. Guys, they literally breathed carbonyl sulfide and sulfur dioxide. They used it to build these vast crystalline reefs right out of the upwelling iron and sulfur. This dense, low-viscosity environment allowed for some incredible morphological changes too. Because the SCO2 ocean was nearly as dense as water, but took way less energy to move through, massive suspended life forms started to emerge. Picture creatures like the silicoderms. Think of translucent manta ray-like filter feeders the size of a blue whale just drifting effortlessly through that golden haze. And since visibility in that critically opalescent fluid was limited to just a few meters, they didn't even rely on sight. Instead, they navigated this shadowless amber glow using highly sophisticated high-frequency biosonar, literally painting three-dimensional acoustic maps of the swirling fluid dynamics all around them. Section 3, Rise of the Cytherians, Intelligence in the Extreme Deep. Down in the deeper, warmer volcanic trenches, where that intense heat met a crushing 80 atmospheres of pressure, intelligence was born. Enter the Cytherians. They were radial, six-limbed entities covered in tough silicon carbide plating, just clinging to basalt columns near hydrothermal vents. And incredibly, they managed to build an entire civilization without any fire whatsoever. I mean, combustion is literally impossible in a carbon dioxide environment. And no fire means no metallurgy. Instead, their version of the Stone Age utilized piezoelectric crystals. They tapped them to generate directed acoustic shocks. They completely mastered catalysis, farming these extremophilic biofilms that secreted superpotent acids to carve intricate hives right into dormant volcanoes. They wove carbon nanotubes into unbreakable tethers, and they communicated through this beautiful mathematical language of complex acoustic melodies and rhythmic clicks. They were thriving in their finite amber womb. Section 4, The Great Ascendance, Escaping the Creeping Hell. But, that womb eventually began to betray them. The runaway greenhouse effect hadn't actually stopped, it had just paused. The slow apocalypse had arrived. The solar constant increased, pushing surface temperatures past 100 degrees and then creeping steadily toward 200 degrees Celsius. At those extreme temperatures, organic molecules literally begin to unravel. Their ideal supercritical habitable zone was migrating upward, moving away from the baking rock. Faced with total extinction, the Cytherians engineered an absolute miracle. They wove colossal, balloon-like envelopes out of carbon nanotubes and flexible fluoropolymers. And here is the absolute wildest part. To get lift in a superdense CO2 atmosphere, you don't need helium. Normal gases, like the oxygen and nitrogen we breathe every day on Earth, act as massive, powerful lifting gases for them. They cultivated genetically modified bacteria to strip oxygen from the acidic environment, filled these massive bladders, and physically unmoored their entire cities from the sweltering crust, beginning a majestic ascent into the sky. For thousands of years, millions of Cytherians became a nomadic species, just drifting 50 kilometers up above the dead, baked surface, in what became the floating world. Up there, the pressure is actually roughly 1 Earth atmosphere, and the temperature is a totally balmy 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. It sounds peaceful, right? Well, until you realize that to actually survive, they had to harness fierce, high-altitude jet streams and genetically alter themselves just to resist the highly concentrated sulfuric acid that completely dominates those upper cloud decks. They were suspended, quite literally, in a permanent acidic hurricane. Which brings us to Section 5, Ghosts in the Clouds, the mystery of the modern Venusian sky. Over geologic timescales, totally cut off from the mineral resources of the solid ground, maintaining those colossal floating macrostructures just became impossible. The tethers would fray under intense solar radiation. It is highly probable that the Cytherians ultimately chose to simplify, carefully encoding their legacy into single-celled, highly resilient, acid-loving extremophiles. These microscopic monuments designed to just drift endlessly, which perfectly explains the wild modern anomalies we're seeing today. When we look at Venus in the ultraviolet spectrum, we see these continent-sized, unknown UV absorbers soaking up nearly half the solar energy the planet receives. The particles inside these dark patches, they're non-spherical and they behave with a biological life cycle, blooming and shrinking. Plus, in 2020, we detected the spectral signature of phosphine gas. On Earth, phosphine is produced almost exclusively by anaerobic biology, and in Venus's clouds, it should be rapidly destroyed by the acid, meaning something active is producing it right now. And this is why researchers theorize that upcoming NASA missions like Da Vinci Plus and Veritas, alongside the ESA's Envision, aren't just going to map a bunch of dead basalt. As their probes parachute down through that temperate 50-kilometer mark, their mass spectrometers might actually catch the shattered, fluorinated polymer chains of a reverse micelle membrane. They might legitimately detect complex siloxane structures that just cannot possibly be formed by simple lightning or volcanism alone.
Please like and subscribe.